It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all for the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation.
The timeline of the churches. Welcome to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we're so very glad that you've joined us once again. We're sorry this program is a little bit late. We're getting busier and busier on the weekends.
Yes.
Derek just got back from Fresno.
A wonderful conference there at a small church in a rural area, Sanger, California. It's in the middle of grape country, or raisin country, really, but a lot of vineyards around there growing grapes. They served lunches, and it's lunch and dinner for the attendees of the conference, which was nice because there's not many restaurant options in Sanger. But that's sort of like Crane. But the grapes, oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Jonathan Cahn's Grapes of Math.
Yes. In fact, the Central Valley there, John Steinbeck country, Grapes of Wrath.
Well, exactly. It would be, too. But I'm really old, and I used to watch those old nighttime soap operas like Dynasty and all that. There was one called Fresno.
Yeah.
That was it was a comedy, and I think Carol Burnett was in it, and it was all about raisins, and they were all, vying for the biggest pile of
all
raisins.
that I knew of the California raisins were the cartoon animated raisins singing
From back in
through the
day,
grapevine.
And they're no longer politically correct anyway.
But a wonderful conference. Paul Anderson and Paul McGuire and Troy Anderson.
We'll just mix them up because they're always together. They write books together.
Yes, the Babylon Code being one of them, and Trumpocalypse, both dealing with end times prophecy and the ramifications for end times prophecy for us in our world today. So they'll be speaking with us again in California at the Hear the Watchman conference in Irvine in just a few weeks, October 11th through 13th.
That's coming up quickly.
It is. So anyway, because of the travel, things are a little bit late. In the next couple of weeks, our schedules will be kind of up in the air.
It's really going to be crazy, and sadly, we did not have a Gilbert House Fellowship this past yesterday as we're recording this, but we'll do our best to make up for that at some point in the future. But so many hours in the day.
Yes.
We got to get to the 7 churches. And I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to give you a little tip for remembering the order that they're in. It's ESP, TSPL. So...
Oh, and I don't even have the Bible program open, so let's see if I can remember.
Okay.
Ephesus, S, that would be Smyrna. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, or Pergamos, depending on your translation.
Upon the translation.
Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea.
Okay, stop. I'm just, because I don't have a list in front of me. I want to make sure that Smyrna is the next one. I think it is, because Sardis, I think, comes in chapter 3. So, Ephesus, Smyrna.
Yep. Pergamum,
Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea.
Exactly. So get those memorized. Now, the reason we're bringing this up and talking about the 7 churches again is because of an outline of Revelation that seems to fit, that when you look at the characteristics of the churches mentioned in the book of Revelation in chapters 2 and 3, that they seem to track with the history of the church beginning with the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
They do indeed, and we're going to give you that historical timeline in just a minute. Before we do, old business.
Yes.
Last week, I promised you that I was going to do some research on what god or goddesses were or was worshipped on Patmos while John was there, where archaeologists have found what they believe are 3 temples on that island. One is to Artemis, and I'll explain that in a minute. One is to Aphrodite, and one is to Apollo, Artemis's twin brother.
Okay.
That's really important because I posed the question last week because we have the Lord telling John, I hold the keys to death and Hades. And I asked, is it important? Of course it's important. That's a rhetorical question, but why is it important?
Right.
So if you get to Patmos having a temple to Apollo, it explains a lot. You want to tell
Revelation 9, and we talked about Resheph last week, and the fact that in the Old Testament, I'm forgetting the verse, but I'll put it on the lower corner here where we put the Bible references. But
we don't
have
chips in our heads yet that we can access everything.
I'm pretty sure it's in one of the Psalms, rather. But anyway, the point is that Resheph was used as a plural in some cases. So it's almost like Resheph, the plague god.
Or even the Reshephim.
That's what I'm saying, is that it was used as a plural, the Reshephim.
Oh.
And this was in reference to God, one of the plagues that God sent to Israel, or to Egypt rather, to free them. So there's that connection between the plague god worshipped by the ancient Amorites and the plagues of Egypt. So you got that connection there. But what we really didn't get into when talking about Resheph and the plague god and the fact that he was considered by the Canaanites the gatekeeper to the netherworld. He was also identified in eastern Mesopotamia, this would be the region under the control of Babylon, as Nergal. Nergal was the underworld god.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and considered the consort of the queen of the great below, Ereshkigal.
Yes, who was Inanna's sister.
Right, long story twisted around. But anyway, Nergal, gatekeeper to the underworld, god of plagues, archer, chariot warrior, like Resheph. But on the island of Cyprus, texts have been found that show that the Greeks knew Resheph. It's just that they called him Apollo. So this underworld god, god of plagues, chariot warrior, archer, known to the Greeks and the Romans as Apollo. Interestingly, in the Greek and Roman pantheon, Apollo is the only god who's known by the same name by both the Greeks and the Romans. Zeus was called Jupiter by the Romans. You had Hera to the Greeks, who was Juno to the Romans, and so on. Hephaestus and Vulcan, etc. But it was Apollo to both the Greeks and the Romans. He was a very, very important deity. But the way he's been sold to us, he's sort of like a golden boy. He hitches up the chariot for the sun god, and he was considered sort of the ideal of Greek youth in their religion. But he was the god of plagues, who held the key to the underworld.
There are some who think he was the god of plagues because he healed them.
Right, but he could also
spread them, exactly, which we may revisit when we get to Revelation 6.
Yes,
now.
But Revelation 9, he is the one who, Revelation 9 verse 1, a star falls from heaven, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit, and these things come out of the pit. I argue that those are the watchers who were sent to Tartarus, the angels who sinned from Genesis 6, and we read, they have king in verse 11, 9:11, isn't that interesting? Revelation 9:11, they have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. Means destroyer. Apollyon is a variant form of the name Apollo. So.
There's a great irony and metaphor with regards to Patmos. The legend of the island of Patmos, and I think I mentioned this previously, but I want to revisit it, is that it was a sunken island. It was below the waters, implying that at one time it may have been above the waters before the flood.
Interesting, yes.
Okay, so it's submerged. By being below the waters, it was a legendary island that Artemis knew about. Artemis, the twin sister of Apollo. Both children of Zeus. Artemis wanted to know if the legends were true, so she had Selene, the moon goddess, shine her lights down upon the waters and illuminate Patmos beneath the waves. She saw that it was a beautiful island, and so she went to her brother and said, look, our dad Zeus isn't going to raise this island just because I ask him to, but if we both go, then I think we can convince him. Well, they do. Therefore, Apollo was instrumental in bringing something under the sea that was hidden
to the surface.
As if he had the keys of hell and death and Hades.
That's a really good image because in the Old Testament, the sea represents chaos, the abyss.
Exactly.
And I hadn't even thought about that. That's really interesting.
It just hit me this morning. And when John was living on Patmos, as I said, there were 3 temples. So one was to Apollo, a temple to Artemis and Apollo, the 2 twin siblings who were responsible for bringing the island up. And so it is understandable that they would have been worshipped there. But I think it's a metaphor for Revelation itself, the fact that the world is going to believe a lie, that it's when this hidden agenda and these hidden entities are brought forth, and the world is astonished by them, that they will worship them.
Yeah.
And Apollo will be worshipped again because, oh, you're the one brought him back. Thank you, thank you.
Yes, as well, that's the fourth eclogue by Virgil, which Tom Horn has written about in Apollyon Rising and in Zenith 2016, which is the updated version. I don't have the fourth eclogue in front of me, but essentially it says justice returns old Saturn's reign. But Apollo is also mentioned in that eclogue. And there are some secret societies out there that
they see that as scripture.
As, yes, the Cumaean Sibyl is what Virgil was citing, and the Cumaean Sibyl was one of Apollo's oracles. And they see it as scripture, but as prophecy yet to be fulfilled. So, not that we'd put any stock in occult prophecies, but we want to be aware of our enemy's devices and what they think.
Because the fallen realm are going to convince many human beings that their version of truth is the correct one. They're going to say, our scriptures, our Bible, that's a false version of what they really did. And Luciferian societies and satanic organizations and many secret societies, they buy that line already.
Absolutely.
But those are sort of hidden small cliques of people.
But wielding an inordinate amount of power in the geopolitical realm here on earth. I've got the translation here, Eclogue 4, Justice Returns. Essentially, it's about a new order of the ages coming around. Now the last age, by Cumae's Sibyl sung, has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Justice returns old Saturn's reign with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only do thou, at the boy's birth in whom the iron shall cease, the golden race arise. They want to bring back the golden age.
Exactly.
When
That's
Kronos
the whole cycle
or Saturn
of the ages.
Ruled in heaven. Right. Befriend him, chaste Lucina. 'Tis thine own Apollo reigns. So yes, they're looking for a return, and Apollo. And now, the other reason we're bringing this up is that the apostles and prophets knew what their pagan neighbors believed and what they were looking for. So this is a kind of thing that John may well have known, but let me see if Virgil, when did Virgil live, actually? Now we're kind of going down a rabbit trail, as we often do.
3rd century BC, something like that?
Yes, or 1st century BC. So the poem by Virgil, his eclogues, would have been distributed throughout the Roman world.
At the time that John was writing this, he'd have known it.
So John would have known it, and of course, writing under the influence of the Holy Spirit, John would have, been directed to use the word Apollo, or the name Apollyon, Apollo, for a purpose, for a reason.
And because he was writing to these 7 churches that they also knew.
Exactly. Very much in the heart of the Roman world.
It's like the Lord knows what he's doing.
Exactly. Well, fascinating stuff.
God.
So on Patmos, a place where Apollo was venerated, and there were many other places around the Roman and Greek world because he was a very important deity. Did not realize that Patmos was one of the places where Apollo's with a temple to Apollo.
I know. Well, we need to take a break, but when we come back, ESP TSPL will be explained, and we're going to tell you how it applies to church history.
Since ancient times, lights in the heavens have been understood as omens of important coming events. They've been seen as the messengers of the gods. But others recognize them for what they really are. Agents of judgment from the one true God, sent to a disobedient and dying world. Now, something is headed toward Earth, and it's set to arrive very soon. It's racing toward our planet at this very moment. It cannot be stopped, and it's carrying the secret of America's, the world's, and your tomorrow.
When God revealed to me the date that Pope Benedict would resign over a year in advance, people were in disbelief until it actually happened. Then, when I shared what God had revealed to me about a worldwide destruction set for only a few years from now, some people responded with disbelief, and some are terrified. Revelation 8 is unfolding as we speak, bringing not only wanton destruction, but also an ancient messenger heralding the arrival of the Great Tribulation period, just before the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the asteroids shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, when they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, with power and great glory.
I predict that over the next 9 years lies the greatest time of trouble the world has ever known. A prophesied aeon that some people call the Great Tribulation period. Whether they want it or not, all of those on earth at this time are going to be forced to heed the warning of the messenger.
Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we are talking about ESP, TSPL, the churches, the 7 churches. And your kids are all going to go, I can remember that. Well, that's
Yes.
how I remember it too.
That's how I had to do it, sure.
We are going to talk about this idea. It's one that I was taught when I was studying Bible prophecy back in the day, and which was like Stone Age. But Brother Dave taught us that the 7 churches not only represented 7 real churches at the time, and they're all in Turkey, modern-day Turkey, but they also represent how at any time during present day, 19th century, 15th century, whatever, that you'll see these same behaviors throughout the body of Christ, because they're very typical behaviors. And even throughout the life of a believer, you'll see times when we lose our first love and we no longer, believe him the way we do. We sort of fall away. But they also line up pretty well with church history.
Yes. And that is really astonishing when you look at it and see how well this tracks together. Now, the church at Ephesus is the first of the 7 churches mentioned. So it's the church in this pattern that follows the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jesus tells the angel of the church at Ephesus, and remember last week we talked about these letters being addressed to the angels of the churches, that he praises them for their works, their patience and endurance, how they can't bear with those who are evil, who've tested those who call themselves apostles and are not. We'll dig deeper into this as we
we're going to take
churches.
one church at a time and really spend our time with it. But if you take a look at all the things that he says to each of these churches, they seem to match up with historical ages.
Right. And this would be the church age from the time of the resurrection, roughly 33 AD, until, and there are differences of opinion as to when the periods extend, but say between 100 AD and maybe up to 170 AD, somewhere in the second century.
That's about what I've always been taught, right about in there.
Yeah, and the one criticism that Jesus had for the church, or for the angel of the church, is that they'd lost their first love. The initial zeal and excitement that the followers of the disciples had, and the ones who the disciples and the apostles trained and sent out.
Yeah, it's sometimes referred to as a backslidden church, and I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, so that which independent, because Brother Dave just felt Southern Baptists were just a little too liberal for him.
Yeah. And there's some, well, I won't want to get into that.
But anyway, that's how I was raised. And so the term backslidden, we all knew what that was, need revival.
Right. Well, following the church at Ephesus is the S in the ESP, TSPL, or the first S, and that's Smyrna, which would go from then sometime in the second century, 100, 150, 170 AD, until the time Constantine legalized the faith in about the year 312 or 313 AD. This would be the persecuted church, the church that was being hunted down by, at first, by the Jewish religious authorities, but after Hadrian crushed the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 130s AD, and essentially depopulated Judea, destroying any hope of an independent Israel for almost 2,000 years. Really, the Roman Empire then began persecuting the church and trying to stamp it out. They considered Christians pagans because they didn't worship the gods, and they didn't worship the emperor.
Yeah, well, who was also a god.
Yes. So the persecutions, and there are a number of persecutions under a variety of emperors from Trajan to Aurelian in the late 3rd century. But when Constantine came around, he realized that these Christians were actually really good soldiers. They were good citizens. They were peaceable, self-sacrifice. And so in order to lift the persecution from them, he legalized the faith. Now, Constantine didn't make it the official religion of Rome, contrary to what you may have heard. That was Theodosius around the year 375 AD. That might not be the exact year, but sometime in the later part of the 4th century. And then, we'll get to that next stage because that's when the church really began to fall. The next stage, of course, is Pergamos or Pergamum, depending on your translation. This would be from the time of the legalization in Constantine, about 312, 313, until, and again, there's some debate over where this period ended. I've got 538 AD here. I think the timeline you have is a little later.
I've got 312 to 606.
Okay, so late 6th, early 7th century.
Yeah, and again, these aren't exact. I just gave you exact dates, but it's really sort of ish.
Right. Different scholars have different opinions on this. But because the church had been made the official religion of Rome at this point, it became a pathway to power and to wealth for those who went into the ministry as a career instead of to actually spread the gospel and make disciples of all nations. There are many, even in this period, and all throughout the church, who sincerely loved the Lord, Jesus Christ, and were making disciples. Let's be honest, if it wasn't for the church, the Roman church, the Orthodox churches, the scriptures would not have been preserved for the last 2,000 years.
In fact, there is still a belief that Irish monks are the ones who saved civilization.
Right. Because of their faithfulness in copying and preserving those scriptures.
Yes.
So yes, I agree with that. Even though we may have issues with specific points of doctrine, we can't deny that God still worked through them as He has worked through imperfect people all through history.
And remember,
including the two of us in front of this camera, these cameras here.
Lord, thank you so much for working through us. Don't know why I chose this, but we're blessed to be here. Licentious church is sometimes what Pergamos is called.
Yes.
And that is where a certain seat was located.
Yes, Pergamum, of course, and we'll see this as we get to the specifics in the church. Pergamum is where the great altar of Zeus was located, and Zeus was just the Greek name for the storm god called Hadad or Adad by the Amorites, better known to you and me in the Bible as Baal. So, and Jesus in Matthew 24, Matthew 24, and also in his letter to Pergamum, specifically identifies this storm god as Satan.
Exactly.
So they were
he says
really
that you live where Satan's seat is.
Right. So this church, the church for that period of church history, kind of connected to where Satan's seat was located.
Well, next we have Thyatira.
Thyatira, the pagan church, beginning late 6th, early 7th century, as the church continued to expand. This, by the way, and this is interesting because it doesn't reflect that this is also the period of history in which the church was severely oppressed by the rise of Islam.
Oh, yes, that's totally left out in this, and I wish it were in here. In fact, we should redo this. This what we're looking at is something that was prepared by another group. We're not associated with this group, but most of the stuff on here I agree with.
Well, and I agree too. It's just that's a gap, I think, in most histories that we pay attention to in the West. And I think a lot of what we read in of this type were analyses that were prepared when Islam was not really aggressively expanding like it is.
Yes, but by saying we in the West, I think most people include Europe in the West, and trust me, Europe was very much aware of what was going on with the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, that is very true.
Especially Eastern Europe.
Yes, which is why some of those Eastern European nations have such a problem with immigration today.
But it's also interesting that these churches are all in Turkey, because when the Islam arose, much of it became homed the home plate, if you wanted, was in Constantinople.
Right.
For centuries.
Exactly. And it held back the forces of
Istanbul,
Islam.
Constantinople.
Right. Had Istanbul fallen or Constantinople fallen sooner, the history of the world would be a lot different.
And of course, it was Istanbul probably during the Ottoman Empire. I'm not really sure. Because Europe always called it. In the 19th century, they're always calling it Constantinople,
Right.
which names it after Constantine.
Right.
But Istanbul has Baal in the name.
Yes. Interesting.
That's an older name.
It's actually, it is an Arabic corruption of Constantinople, Istanbul.
Istanbul is?
Yeah.
I hadn't realized that because it sure sounds like it's
Yeah,
got
it
Baal
kind
in
of
the
does,
name.
but yeah.
Are you sure about that? We'll look that up.
I'm pretty, I think I'm right about
Pretty
that.
not bad. No,
But anyway,
you
but the
probably
church,
are right.
as it expanded and tried to make itself pleasing to pagans in Europe as it grew, adopted certain church practices and traditions, or brought into the church practices and traditions that came in from the outside. So Thyatira representing the pagan church. Next, the Sardis era between the.
Well, we're running low on time, so we're going to sort of crunch these three in together: Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Some believe that they all sort of mingle together, but they begin in 1520-ish.
Yes, and not coincidentally, that was the time of the Protestant Reformation. But the Church of Sardis often used to represent the dead church because it also coincides with the Enlightenment.
Well, exactly. And in 1750, the Enlightenment takes off big time.
Right.
Because then we get into the Darwin family and the Wedgwood family that was a cousin of that, and get into Erasmus Darwin, who was the grandfather of Charles Darwin, whose cousin was the one who proposed eugenics, Sir Francis Galton.
The Church of Philadelphia, beginning towards the end of the 18th century and running through the middle of the 19th century, or even up into the early 20th century, which is the church that sent out missionaries and began to change the world again for the good, was instrumental in ending slavery and so forth. But the modern church, the lukewarm church, the Church of Laodicea, the one that Jesus wants to vomit out of his mouth, which is the present day church, where we're more concerned with people's rights and our rights and social justice than we are with sin and salvation.
That seems to be the predominant aspect of the modern church, but I will say that I was taught that Philadelphia and Laodicea, Philadelphia continued.
Yes,
because you always
there is
have a remnant.
Yes. So that, in a nutshell, is the seven church ages
ESP,
throughout
TSP.
history. Yes, yeah. ESP, TSPL, and
LSMFT. I had to say it.
Old enough to remember that one. So again, this is not a theological hill on which to die, but it is interesting because as we go through the churches, we'll dig deeper into the praise and the criticism that Jesus has for each of the churches and show you then how that matches up with this model of how the churches of Revelation symbolize church history in the history of the world.
There you go.
Well, we hope you enjoy this because we sure enjoy digging deeper into this every single week, and we thank you for watching. With Sharon Gilbert, I'm Derek Gilbert. This is Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV.
Unraveling Revelation is part of Skywatch TV, a viewer-supported ministry. To learn more about Skywatch TV and the work of our sister ministry, Whispering Ponies Ranch, please visit our website, skywatchtv.com. You can support us through your prayers and by taking advantage of the special offers at skywatchtvstore.com. And please join us for our weekly study of the Bible, verse by verse in chronological order, online at gilberthouse.org.